Hi, everyone. Welcome to this panel called Scaling Ecosystem Restoration. So we broaden the title. It will be inclusive of rewilding and species reintroduction, but we've expanded it to the whole of scaling ecosystem restoration. My name is Christabel Reed. I'm one of the happy co-founders of Advaya. I hope you've been enjoying this morning here at the stage. We've had some incredible speakers, some of the people who have inspired Ruby and I over the past 8 years. So it's been a real honor, and I'm honored to be joined by these incredible panelists. We're talking about ecosystem restoration, which is what I feel most passionate and excited by. And I really hope that after this panel, you all walk away being as in love or almost as in love or on a journey of falling in love with ecosystem restoration, because there's a lot of talk of climate anxiety and apathy, and I think that no wonder, because media, only 3% of all media reporting when it comes to the climate and ecological crisis is focused on the solutions. 97% is focused on the problem. So no wonder people feel so overwhelmed and so apathetic or so depressed. But the truth of it is that solutions abound, and that there are people who today and who for millennia have been living as regenerative forces in their natural ecosystems. And so what I feel so excited by is how can we make traditional ecological knowledge accessible and aspirational, and make it mainstream, and really platform the wisdom keepers and the active participants who are doing this beautiful work that is so intersectional and that really brings together everything from biodiversity to community to localization to local economies, to carbon drawdown, everything in between. Alongside Advaya, my sister and I also run a charity called Earthed, and that's because we, as falling in love with ecosystem restoration, we realize that this is something that everyone can be involved in, but the knowledge systems that probably used to be passed down to each of us are now becoming more and more inaccessible. So how can each of us access the skills we need to start and scale our own restoration projects? And so this is a charity platform, and you can go on it and learn about urban gardening or mangrove restoration or combating wildfires and everything in between. So we just launched and very excited about it, and I hope you guys can check it out. The reason why ecosystem restoration is so essential is because, as many of you will know, ecosystems around the world are being depleted. We're facing a sixth mass extinction. Biodiversity is on decline. Harvests are waning. And the UN reports that we need to restore 1 billion hectares in the next 8 years, so basically by the end of the decade. And whilst I feel like timeframes like that always feel a little bit arbitrary, the point is that we need to be really scaling up ecosystem restoration. And for those who don't know, ecosystem restoration is a process of assisting the recovery of a natural area. There is a big rhetoric of kind of get humans off the land so that nature can restore itself, but nature is so depleted that it actually needs human participation. And also this narrative of humans are a virus on the planet who cannot live in harmony with nature is one of the most dangerous myths of today that I really feel is enveloping young people and all people, and it's, I think, one of the most dangerous and harmful. So that's a little bit of an intro to the potential and possibility of ecosystem restoration and why it's so important that we start to scale it out. So Danny, I would like to start with you. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just introduce themselves, the work you do, and how that's intersecting with ecosystem restoration.
Okay, my name's Danny Renton, and I run a charity called Sea Wilding, which is based on the west coast of Scotland. And it's a community-based charity. It's based on a loch called Loch Craignish in Argyll. And the purpose of the charity is to restore the biodiversity of the loch. So this particular loch, just like so many west coast sea lochs in Scotland, has seen a massive decline in biodiversity over the last 100 years. And our community have been looking at that over the last few decades and wondering what's happened and what we can do about it. And we formed this charity in order to try and put back some of the species that have gone missing from the loch. And notably, it's seagrass and native oysters. And both these things are ecosystem engineers. 95% of them have disappeared around the UK coastline. So this project is not just showing that communities can restore their sea loch, but it's also a research project to show other communities how we can do it at scale.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jade Brudenell. I'm the director of the Conservation Collective. We're a global network of 20 local environment foundations which are focused on restoring and protecting nature in the area that they are based. And I'm lucky enough on the panel to have Dulma, who's one of our funders in the Devon Environment Foundation, and Danny, who we support in Scotland in the Highlands and Islands Environment Foundation. Our approach is based on, I guess, focusing around two of the biggest issues facing environmental philanthropy. One is that not enough people give money. It's a chronically underfunded space. Less than 3% of total philanthropic funding around the world goes to the environment, versus 20%, which goes to the arts, which when we think about the issues that Christabel has described is kind of frankly quite scary. But all is not lost. We've found that if you localize an issue, people are far more likely to give. It's much more rewarding and I guess less daunting to give money to a problem that you can see and therefore a solution that you can see, such as the one that Danny just described. So the first thing is raising money. That's one of the big things we do. We're building a movement of local foundations. We have 11 in the Mediterranean, 2 in the Indian Ocean, 2 in the UK, 2 in the Caribbean, and hopefully kind of building a few more each year. And the second issue that we're trying to address is how do we get that money into the hands of the people who are best placed to deliver this ecosystem restoration that Christabel has described. And that's the kind of role we're playing. We describe ourselves as kind of, intermediaries, cheerleaders, pollinators, galvanizers. We're just kind of enabling the solutions to come together.
Thank you.
You got your own.
Hi, so my name is Leah Doyle. I run a nonprofit called Oceanic Global, focused on ocean health. And essentially, we focus on 2 things. The first is reconnecting people back to the ocean as the lifeblood of the planet. And the second is how do we come back into balance? And we do this through mobilizing local impact, so actually providing educational resources to people on the ground, as well as distributing micro grants around climate resiliency. The second is working with industries to shift their operating practices. So how can businesses be agents of good here? And how do we start to redesign these systems? And the third is making sure that we are putting oceans into all of these larger climate narratives. So for example, with climate. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Anna Lehmann. I'm Global Climate Policy Director with Wildlife Works. I have 2 hats on. Basically, as I'm here, I very much operate in the left brain of the economy in my day job, where we attract finance to develop conservation projects, forest conservation projects with indigenous communities and local communities in tropical countries. I deal a lot with governments, government relation and lawyers, negotiating and supporting communities and negotiating those equitable investment partnerships. And I'm also a trained biologic dynamic farmer, and when I was little I thought I'm going to work on the land because that's just what makes me happy and that's where my home is. But I quickly realized I can't live from that, and lots of the farmers live on the poverty line. So that spun me off onto a whole, I would call it odyssey through the corporate world. I worked as a field economist for governments in development programs around the world, in Asia and in Africa, and then moved on to an asset manager and spent 10 years in the renewable energy sector because I was so depressed by what's going on in the land sector. And so just to base myself, I think, back on and ground myself as I'm doing this international work, I started a charity. We're based in Brighton. It's called the No Planet B Initiative, and we run a food growing site, a community garden, and it's sort of my therapy project almost, because just going back to the land, having my hands in the soil, and actually seeing nature come back and how she comes back every spring. And I need to go travel, and I come back and I'm going, wow, this is daunting. It's sometimes scary, and that's the wonderful side, and that really shows me nature comes back. In my day job, I have to deal with all these numbers of losses for 30 years of how much we've lost agricultural soil, forests, due to all these factors, climate change. It's just worsening. But seeing nature being able to come back, even in places like Britain, let alone the tropics, there's a huge opportunity in there. So that deeply inspires me, and so I'm looking at ways of bringing finance to restoration projects around the world and Britain actually, and help scaling that up in the communities here.
Hi, my name is Dulma. I'm from Viva Barefoot. So the nature restoration programs, we do it all from the ground up. So we are a footwear company, family-owned business. We have a stand right behind us. Go and check it out, please. So we are on a mission to reconnect people to nature and human natural potential from the ground up. So that's kind of the first and foremost purpose of the company, is like how we can inspire people to connect to nature and ourselves, because we are nature and nature is us. And we believe a lot of issues that we have right now on the planet is like we kind of lost the connection to who we are. And even if you look into Cambridge and Oxford dictionary and look at the description of nature, I can't remember exactly, but it basically says that something separate from humans, which is like fundamentally so wrong. So we're trying to inspire people to connect better with nature ourselves from the ground up, bare feet on one earth, literally grounded, connected, and then obviously as a business that's actually making physical products, we look at every single item in our value chain and how we work with local communities, and I guess we'll touch base on that later. But that incorporates working with indigenous communities all the way how we manufacture from like material innovation point of view. So it's very fascinating space to be. I had no idea that I will end up working in a footwear brand. I'm by training a human rights lawyer and a development worker. I was with the UN and charities and in philanthropic sector, but this is really interesting from like how you can create value through a business and generate and reinvest everything you've got, but also do it really well. So we are one of the top scoring B Corp companies on the planet, and it's like, yeah, I must say it's a really fascinating place to be. So there's quite a lot of contextual problems with the industry. Just very quickly to give some perspective, the world produces 20 to 24 billion pairs of shoes every year. Yeah, and it all ends up in landfills. So that's kind of like an immediate big number that like nobody really thinks about, and it's like, whoa, okay, like, and how is this all made of? Yeah, super complex supply chains, toxicity, etc. So that all gets back to how we reorganize, regenerate this whole entire industry, and we're testing left, right, and center. And I'm honored to be working with Christabel and Jade and a lot of many friends in the room. So nice to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for so beautifully kind of and eloquently talking about your work and its intersection with ecosystem restoration. And yeah, Viva Barefoot, it's so wonderful to know that you're also working with Conservation Collective and has massively supported the charity in our startup years. So super grateful. A golden thread through what each of you have said is about the power of community. And I think, you know, when it comes to scaling out ecosystem restoration, of course you need top-down initiatives. You need, you know, corporates taking action. You need governments taking action. You need, you know, really like big initiatives. However, as the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration reports, is that really where we are right now is that there isn't the political will, the infrastructure, or the funds, supposedly, to fund ecosystem restoration at the scale it needs. And what needs to happen is for local people everywhere to be incentivized, and for each local action to be able to scale up to the point where it's having global and meaningful impact. So I would love for us to hone in to community and what each of you have learned. And you don't all have to answer the question, but I feel like you're all going to want to talk to this. So maybe Danny, starting back with you, what have you learned about local action and the power of bringing people together around restoration?
Well, I think one of the things that we've learnt on the west coast of Scotland is that if we hark back to the past, the west coast of Scotland was a fantastic fishery ground. And if you went to places like Oban and Ullapool and places like that, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, you saw scores and scores and scores of fishing boats, and tens of thousands of people were employed in fisheries. If you go there now, there's just 4,000 people employed in fisheries. There are very few fishing boats left, and the opportunity that the sea gave to people and to communities, the lifeblood for communities, is now gone. And so what we're seeing is really tapping into a deep sense of disassociation within our community, looking out at our sea loch, knowing that 50 years ago it was full of life, knowing that lots of people had jobs because of it, and now that they don't. So a frustration in the community and a sense that they want to address that frustration and wrest back the narrative from the big industries such as the salmon farming, aquaculture is huge in these lochs, and also the mobile fishing sector, which is scallop dredging and bottom trawling, which is what's left of this once great rich fishery. So we're really tapping into that resentment and that frustration and that desire of communities to restore biodiversity and to manage these inshore waters and these local water bodies themselves in order to restore biodiversity and in order to restore all the opportunity that they once gave.
Beautiful, thank you. I think what I'm hearing and thinking about as you're speaking, Danny, is about the importance of environmental issues being grounded in the locality and then engaging local people in a way that is very relevant and taps into their actual lives. And I feel that an issue with environmental narratives and rhetoric in the media is that it's so focused on like the tragedy and the crisis and like the wildfires, or it becomes like incredibly systemic also in like more of the mainstream sort of social media climate action movements. And I think being able to hone it down into something that is really tangible, and like just to contextualize around ecosystem restoration and the impact on local economies, apparently for every $1 invested in ecosystem restoration, $7 is then created for the local economy. And I think often in like nature realms, you want to kind of separate nature kind of movements from economy because we think they're separate, but actually I think it just ends up isolating a lot of people. And the more you make it real to like this is also how we pay our bills and live a happy, healthy life is essential. And I'd love to whiz round to you and ask about your experience of engaging community in Brighton or in other projects you've been involved in.
I was just hoping for 2 more speakers to come in to see, because it's such a rich conversation. But let me take a stab at this, because I'll end in Brighton, but I'd like to start sort of around the world. One initiative I'm part of is, and sort of have co-founded, is the People's Forests Partnership, which is an organization that brings together indigenous groups and companies to create a safe space for both sides to really learn from each other. And so I've been done a lot of listening to indigenous groups from around the world in terms of, their desire, and also learning about their worldviews and systems. And I think the previous speaker we had here in the stand, she really made this beautiful case of they live in community and they have governance structures and actually forms of living with each other that really enable stewardship of large territories, which we, for our own colonial past and brutal past that we had in the past, of which our societies have suffered just as much as other societies, that we have lost, And so I'm sitting there in awe and sort of, reflecting and thinking, how can I bring this back to my community? We get on the land and we struggle, and we fight. I've been to the Land Skills Fair earlier this year, which is a beautiful festival of the Land Workers Alliance, and everybody working in land, being a land worker or loving a land worker, become a member. They do amazing work, really standing up for rights of people in this country. And and they kept saying, well, yeah, we want to live in community, but it's just so hard, just dealing with each other when you have lost those ways of life. And I think what we're doing here, is a huge step towards in that direction. Seen in Britain, so many festivals, so many conversations coming up. That is already community building, so we're already in it. I think that's really important to keep in mind. We're already doing the right thing. Another thing I found fascinating. So in my work, one of the first questions when we look at where can we bring money is always to look at what does the ownership structure look like? What is the role of the community? How is their stewardship role sort of, what kind of legal basis or customer basis can we build on, so that it passes due diligence? That's what it's all about at the end of the day, taking the fear of the investor. And that, and I was then, we have a project in Kenya, and then I looked at Britain. We don't work here yet, but I then realized, the land ownership structure is actually quite similar. And no surprise, I guess, right? We know where the Kenyans have it from. And looking at Scotland, actually, and I really just want to give a big shout out to the Scottish Land Commission, because they're doing a fascinating job right now developing a huge set of guidelines and principles of how to build community-owned, community-led restoration projects that communities can take on, and that help, that shall help this due diligence process. And I think within the UK, certainly Scotland is like the beaming star, I think, in that landscape. England has a much heavier heritage, I think, in that regard, much more barriers to come over. At the end of the day, it's access to land, right? It's land justice, access to land. I think that's the whole point. We go with it, we will always come back there. But once we start, what I find fascinating in my work, once we start sort of bringing in some money people, bring in some people that have only learned to really think with their left-hand side of the brain, right? And slowly bringing them the other side and showing, well, you can trust these people, they're lovely, Then we can come and strike some quite amazing deals.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You touched on the role of indigenous communities, and Dulma, I wanted to invite you to speak to the role of indigeneity and indigenous communities and your experience when it comes to restoration. There was a report I read, and it was one of the reasons why we started Earth. It was by Survival International, and it was saying how this research they'd done showed that the most fertile areas of the Amazon are actually where agriculture was being done, and at a huge scale, because the Amazon was like filled with communities. And so what's incredible is you kind of compare that with the narrative of today, which is get farmers off the land and grow vertically and just leave it to be rewild, which is like really like a terrifying thought. And also just contrast how far away we've come from the intentional way in which people will go about their lives, feeding themselves and their family, educating themselves, and at the same time, being growing biodiversity. And I think kind of remembering that narrative and reconnecting to those kinds of practices and bringing that home, or learning about the traditional ways of interacting with local ecosystems where you live, is absolutely essential, not only for ecosystem restoration, but also just for a sort of paradigm shift. So Dulma, indigeneity and its relationship with ecosystem restoration.
Yeah, thank you. So as a company on a mission to create perfect footwear for natural movement, it was really, really hard in the modern environment in the West to actually find natural movers, healthy natural movers from birth, like adults. So the journey led us all the way to the Kalahari Desert. We ended up in literally in the middle of nowhere with the San people of the Kalahari to learn persistent hunting, or basically see how they move naturally. Yeah, but then that was more like an anthropological biomechanics study with a university. But then we ended up working there since then for now. This is the 8th year working with the community, and then that project led us working with Sami people, with Mongolian people, all the way to North America, and trying to recreate the Navajo moccasin there. But the whole concept is that the original way of making. So first of all, footwear has been part of our evolutionary historic sort of evolution since from the dawn of times. So our difference from so basically the theory how we evolved as humans, we sweat really well, so we can run really long time, so we can do persistent hunting, so to say. So perhaps even before we invented bow and arrow, first way how we actually hunted is just basically running after the animal until it collapses from exhaustion. So that's have a look at the podcast by Dan Lieberman. It's really fascinating, the latest one with Stephen Bartlett, and he talks really well about it. So anyways, to cut a long story short, when we went to Namibia and we started learning about movement, we're like, oh my God, actually, where is the original designs? What are these original hunting sandals? Where did this all go? And there was this old man sitting under the tree who knew how to make it. And I don't know, he was really, really old, and he probably might pass away any minute. And we're like, oh my God, can you show us how to do it? And then he started telling us a story, how they used to hunt, how the community was organized. And so we're like, okay, can we, before this man gets too old and forgets about the whole thing, can we organize a community-led, basically artisanal workshop space where we can recreate these hunting sandals? And then more we learned about it, and we've been working together now for 8 years. we also saw that this beautiful circular way of making things. Yeah, like originally footwear was made foot by foot, person by person. It breaks, you go back and gets mended and all of that. But then we started looking at how it translates into modern environment. Like using modern technologies, can we recreate this way of making? So we started working on 3D printing made to measure projects where now the community is all getting engaged, and I'm getting why nature is very important because it's all can be done in a very circular way. So I gave some stats earlier, but how we can create more like a global way of connecting to each other, but also getting the products that we need locally. So that goes back all around the kind of ancient with the modern technology, and it is possible right now because you can see the living examples, like at least from our side, how we're doing it, and I'm sure there's plenty of those available. But it's been definitely an incredible honor to work with so many different communities in different parts of the world, and a lot of them are set up as cooperatives, and it's all like we get blessings from the elders to get access and how to organize their work together, and it's it's very beautiful. And I'm myself privileged to. Actually, I only learned that I'm an indigenous person only about 9-10 years ago when I moved to Europe, because I had no idea like of how the colonialism sort of translated into the way how the world is now. Because I grew up in Siberian Russia, and all this information was completely closed. So for me, psychologically, emotionally, going through this process also through business and learning about the relationship and the indigenous way of living has been a beautiful way of like circling all the way back around. And yeah, it's been quite a fascinating journey.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dulma. Leo, I'd love to ask you about, because the work of Oceanic Global, you work a lot with the UN and work a lot around this like multi-stakeholder engagement, but you also work a lot around kind of bringing awareness to and supporting with local kind of coastal communities with like the issues, massive emergency facing the ocean. So I would love for you to speak to like on that local level, and maybe how like the local and the kind of global can hold hands in its response to scaling restoration.
Yeah, so I notice a lot of the projects here, a little bit more land, some ocean too, but the ocean space is very different to the land space. So our planet is made up of 90% biosphere, is 90% ocean. And a lot of that is actually unregulated. So, and to put that also into perspective, only 5% of our deep oceans are actually explored. So there is so much potential there that we have no idea of how we're interacting with right now. In the last 6 months alone, the UN body has put forward 2 of the largest, I would say, regulations that could shift our lives. The first is the High Seas Treaty, which is under negotiation. How are we utilizing our high seas? And the second, which was being negotiated on in July, is deep sea mining. And most people, I'm sure, actually here have no idea how to interact with this. But this will affect essentially all of us, depending on how this comes to fruition. So our belief is when you're working within oceans, you need to be working at that level where these decisions are being made are going to essentially affect every single person down the line. Working with governments too in terms of how to be looking at using these ocean resources is then essential, putting strong regulation in place, transparency, and then further down is working with the people to be managing that. And we've heard some like very, very tangible examples of how nature can rebound, and we see that very, very quickly in oceans. And a beautiful example is with marine protected areas. And when you create a marine protected area, originally we're seeing actually bounce back in 40% less than we originally thought when you're looking at like species population rates increasing. But only successful marine protected areas also work with the fishing communities, work with indigenous communities, all the local stakeholder groups on how are they using these areas and allowing for, as part of their supply chain too, allowing for areas to rebound. And marine protected areas which are completely closed off, we see illegal trade increasing, etc. So within oceans specifically, it's so important to be working at all levels of stakeholder engagement to really long-term be pushing these through in an effective way.
Amazing, thank you. And Jade, I would love for you to speak to. So I think what's so cool about the Conservation Collective is that you are, you're taking on something that is systemic, which is like the lack of resources which are going to the people who need them. What has been your experience with working in the local, and how do you think that can offer a solution to this kind of the blockages of resources?
Well, I've got an example I'd love to kind of talk through, which really, I think, nicely touches on what Leah just talked about and what other members of the panel have said. And it's about a fishing community which really took the kind of marine protected areas issue into their own hands. And so this is a part of the Cyclades Preservation Fund that we set up, which is a group of islands in Greece. People will know Mykonos, Santorini, all the swanky ones, but there's a whole load, I think it's 32 inhabited and many more uninhabited, and one called Amorgos, where there is a group of fishermen who were just noticing what everyone else in their world was noticing, that the fish stocks were completely depleted, that the seagrasses were being destroyed by boats anchoring. And whilst there is, I think across the Mediterranean, 8.3% of it is formally declared a marine protected area, 0.8% of it is actively managed as a marine protected area, 0.04 is a no-take zone. So if you're heading towards this 30 by 30 thing, there's quite a long way to go. But this community of fishermen sort of sat down and said, what can we do about it? And they agreed as a group to abstain from fishing in the months of April and May, which is when the most vulnerable fish stock were reproducing, and avoid then fishing where the nursery grounds were. They did that for a year voluntarily. They then met Annie Mitropoulou, who is the local director who we have there, who I think is kind of part of the key to our model, is having someone full-time based in those locations to sit down with people and brainstorm and listen to problems. Listen being the operative word, because NGO world are not good at listening. Listen, what do they need? How can we help you to continue this? Because they had the goodwill to do something, but how can we help you continue it, scale it, make it sustainable? And what they did was we offered them a grant of funding to collect plastic from the hard-to-reach bays for the certain 2 months of the year that they were going to abstain from fishing. This is not a solution forever, but it, for the short term, helped with the kind of bridge of alternative livelihoods. And in the time that we were sitting and Annie was brainstorming with them and working on things, it became, the fishermen there became this vision of Amorgorama, it's called, which is the MPA there. Over 2 years, they've now attracted interest from the government, who are thinking, how can we get MPAs to work? Well, this is actually someone handing them a solution with the community buy-in, which is the thing that they tend to lack elsewhere when they just say, no fishing here. So it's really exciting. We're not there yet. We've had a memorandum of understanding from the Greek government. We're having scientific studies. We're now working with Blue Marine Foundation, who probably many people here will know as well. And I think it's a really lovely example of how many different people it needs to get one of these solutions going. And we're not even there yet, but it's really exciting to see that groundswell of momentum, and then to see how our role can play, connecting them to global scientists, connecting them to people who've done this in other parts of the world, and most importantly, finding the money for the short-term bridge until it could be potentially a kind of EU or government-funded initiative.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing that really positive case study. And I think, as I was saying at the start of this, it's really easy to kind of to not see or not know, because it's not spoken about enough, that there are these pockets of restoration and regenerative kind of community building which are happening all over the world. And Danny, I would love to I'm so excited by the work of Sea Wilding, and I would love for you to just give you the stage to just talk a little bit more about what you're doing in a bit more of a practical way, like how are you working with the community to be restoring the seagrass and oysters?
Okay, well, I talked about our sea loch, Loch Graignish, on the west coast of Scotland, which is very typical of other sea lochs on the west coast of Scotland. Very depleted of biodiversity. They've been scallop dredged. There's big salmon farms. So there's all sorts of pressures that have affected biodiversity over time. And so what we're doing is looking at the sea loch like a marine lab and saying, as a community, so it's 500 people living around the shores of this loch, saying let's all get together to see what we can do to restore the biodiversity in the loch. And the two things that we're doing, so one of them is native oysters. So native oysters used to be everywhere around the UK shoreline. To give you an idea, that in the Firth of Forth outside Edinburgh, 100 years ago, they were dredging 3 million oysters every year. And there hasn't been a live oyster seen there for for at least 50, 60 years. So this really important part of our ecosystem has almost completely disappeared, and it survives in small relic populations in those recondite places where people can't find them. So it's mainly human predation that is done for the native oyster. And the purpose of our loch is we know that in Victorian times they were there in plenitude, huge oysters, some of them weighing up to 1 kilogram. Each of these oysters filters around 200 litres of water in a 24-hour period. So it removes the nitrates and the phosphates, and it's really important for water quality. So if you can bring back native oysters, you can help restore water quality, and they form these massive beds on the seabed, 3D complex reefs, and they become fish spawning grounds and fish nurseries. So really, really important for biodiversity. So we're putting, over a 5-year period, 1 million native oysters back onto the seabed. We've put down around 300,000, and there's lots of surveying and lots of science to prove the efficacy of what we're doing. The other thing we're doing is seagrass. So seagrass, just like native oysters, 95% of it has disappeared, more or less, around the European coastlines.
How does it
Are you going to hurry me up?
No. I wanted you to go into more
Go
detail.
on for hours.
No, more detail. I don't understand how seagrass gets destroyed.
Okay, so seagrass is effectively seagrass is the ocean's only flowering plant. It needs really good water quality to photosynthesize. And what did for seagrass really, there's a wasting disease which is occurred around the 1930s, but mainly what's happened is water quality, pollution, and mechanical dredging. So where you get scallop dredgers and bottom trawlers, they'll rip through a seagrass meadow and destroy it, but also water quality, nitrates, phosphates, things like that. So in our sea loch, we have around 5.5 hectares of seagrass meadows in scattered areas, but we have around 80 hectares where we think there should be seagrass, but there isn't. So again, going back to this idea of a marine lab, what we're trying to do is enhance those meadows, look at all the different methodologies for doing it, and doing it with a lot of science in order to show that we can do this at scale. And we're nearly there. We've done it for 3 years now. We think we've possibly cracked it with a methodology which is basically translocating plants. We call it rhizome plantation. And that's looking particularly good. And so in 2 to 3 years, we could have cracked it. And then we think that we can potentially roll it out at scale and bring back this really important ecosystem engineer back to inshore waters.
How amazing. Thank you. I hope that everyone's heart gets lifted as you hear about these human beings who have just like immersed themselves into knowledge. And I mean, I don't know about your background, but I think it's incredible that that humans can learn these techniques and become active participants and become regenerative forces whilst building community. I makes me emotional. But I just feel like it's a love story, and it's just so beautiful to hear. So thank you. Anna, I want to come back round to you because Danny was speaking about biodiversity and about the active participation that we can all do in order to increase it. And I know that you work around soils and biodiversity and also carbon. I'm intrigued because the kind of mainstream governmental narratives that we hear are so focused on carbon, and to the point that also as Helena Norberg Hodge was saying before, that I now have an aversion to when someone says carbon, which is not quite right because I shouldn't be, because obviously it's essential, but it's just because of the absolute focus on it. It now like puts my back up when someone just continues to talk about carbon. So it's maybe a strange question, but I wanted you to possibly speak to what is the relationship between balancing the narrative of carbon whilst also really making space for the importance of biodiversity and building back biodiversity.
Yeah. Right, that's a little conversation. We probably need a whole day or a whole week to really go, into the depths of this. It's complicated. It's complicated stuff, and I think one thing we really need to allow ourselves when we open up the conversation about carbon credits and offsets is that we give ourselves time and that we allow for nuance, because it's complicated. And I would say, we are, so there's, I think it's important in the conversation to distinguish two sides. First, what do we want to talk about? I think one side is what we call the supply side of how do we produce carbon credits and how do we attract finance. And I see exciting projects around the world. I see exciting, I hear excited voices, indigenous voices, local communities, other communities that are looking at these forms to finance their stewardship. But it's all about getting it right. It's all about getting the principles right and really making this community driven, and then, to attract the finance, but also to spend it in the right way. But amazing impact actually has been shown, and me as an agricultural economist who's been looking to finance restoration and conservation work around the world, I've always been eager of, the main question is like, how do we get money into this? How do we create those jobs to plant those hedges, to restore those soils? And I see, and I've been grateful to be part of projects where that has been made possible through carbon credits. The demand side of how these credits are being used is the other part of the conversation, really, really complicated, right? Which company's buying it, why are they buying it, what do they say, how do they use it? And that's where my stomach turns upside down. Because as long as our global emissions are still rising, none of the companies can really truly say like we're carbon neutral here or anything, right? But for me, it's the bigger question of how can we reallocate capital? How can we reallocate wealth from where the money is? And it is with the large corporates. It's not even with the governments anymore, So blocking that out, I think, is like missing out, on a way on a funding stream that I find quite dramatic, and I feel like we all have a responsibility here, it's a huge responsibility of what we're doing, of what our generation has, and I just think always, let's not say no, look at all the tools in the toolbox, but get it right, work with best practices and work, along really high integrity principles. And there's exciting work that's happening. So that's what I wanted to say on carbon. I'm happy to take all the questions out there and throw myself on the ring, if you will. Just a word on biodiversity briefly, because it's a different story, right? And so with my day job, Wildlife Works, our projects are conservation projects, so we monitor biodiversity. Monitoring carbon is hard. Monitoring biodiversity is much harder because, like, bees fly around, elephants walk, so it costs a lot of money, but it's really fascinating to build indigenous tools and work with indigenous science around biodiversity monitoring. There's, just such cool stuff happening. And but that's sort of a value attached to the carbon that some companies buy. Actually, most companies that buy nature-based solution credits, they all want the biodiversity component. Nobody wants to buy from a crab project. Nobody is buying anymore from an acacia plantation. That was, the Kyoto Protocol 15 years ago. People tried it, didn't work. So I think, we need to have this now, but also there's value in, of course, just biodiversity. And in the UK, there is regulation coming. Compliance is ramping up for companies to show their biodiversity footprint. I don't know. I haven't really made my mind up yet of whether I think it's a good thing that, developers, when they have a housing estate and they build something here, that then they can offset that. Doesn't really work for me. But, maybe there is use cases where that really makes sense. But there's certainly also other ways of looking at this, stewardship units or much smaller. I think we see great projects doing smaller interventions and then finding local buyers. It's a much more localized market. And actually, I think the inspiring thing is coming from companies that are looking at their neighbors, looking at their communities and going like, oh, okay, this is not going great. What can we do better together? And that's a true innovation that I think is coming out of Britain right now, which I hope will also scale and inspire countries like Brazil, where there's actually a lot of money. There's a lot of wealthy people in Brazil.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Leah, please.
Can I just add something on carbon credits? Because we're starting to see in the ocean space, everyone is talking about the blue economy. So, mangroves, seagrass, kelp forests. And we also work with a lot of corporates. And actually, it's quite a dangerous space to be in right now because it is completely unregulated and it is like cowboy land. Every company is creating their own frameworks and criteria around this, financial models. And so I just want to do a word of caution, essentially, for those that are looking at investing within this in the ocean space. And we also notice that it's quite limiting how corporations are then actually creating their ESG strategies, because if something doesn't fall within their carbon zero goals, they really move it to the side, and it's not part of like a 5-year strategy, etc. So we're starting to see things like biodiversity creep in, but it really, because of I would say because globally, actually right now, everyone is so focused on carbon, it's really prohibiting us to think holistically of how we're interacting and how we're essentially looking at putting life at the center of everything. So I would just love to invite us to kind of challenge the existing frameworks. And I think that we are having these conversations because we realize our current systems are failing us. And the only way forward is to really inject a lot of creativity and starting to understand all these different intersection points. So.
Can I respond to this briefly? Add on.
Obviously passionate conversation.
I'll go very quickly. I completely agree on both these things these brilliant ladies have said. I think for the mass scale change that is needed, we have to be open-minded for different scales of economic models, because it's a capitalist world. That's how it works. We can't, livelihoods are needed, all these things. But last year we got called once a week by people saying, have you got any of these blue carbon thingies? Because everyone wanted to buy them, and all unnamed banks, whoever it was. And I think in reality, you guys will know more than I think there are 2 or 3 live blue carbon projects, aren't there, in the world? There really aren't that many, but it became such a buzz that everyone, and then we'd call people like Danny being like, what do you think? Can we do blue carbon with oysters, seagrasses? Because, the scale, all the things he was talking about, they're developing amazing things, but it's going to take a while, and we have to bring all these different researchers and funders and different people together to get there. But I just think, you're right, we can't black it out, but it's not there yet.
Yeah, totally agree with both of you. And you just gave a brilliant example of what I was saying, the demand side, the struggles really that we have on the demand side, because that is totally unregulated. We've got no clue what Shell is doing with the credits they buy, right? And
Shell should never be able to be carbon neutral. That's another
exactly. So and yeah, that's a fact. And I try in my job. I do try. Hey, actually. But I mean, on the good side, is there are more and more initiatives coming up that are driving for transparency in this space, that are driving for reporting, that are driving for standardization of climate goals and so on. It's not my expertise. I'm not going to speak to that. But there's a push. On the supply side, where we operate, we're hugely regulated. We fall under government regulation, front, right, and center. And actually, I mean, I'm literally part in conversations. We're advocating with the Kenyan government, with the Brazilian government at the moment, that for the first time has created a Ministry of Indigenous People. We are, practically in the room asking for regulation for safeguards, social safeguards, because we see carbon also being a segue to secure territorial rights, in a way. Because once you start, driving finance to an area, and once the government is part of an investment program that spans over several decades, and that will see tax revenues coming to them, we hope they have higher chances of leaving those people alone and actually let them do their thing, right? So that's what we're trying. So always really, supply side is hugely regulated, and we have a hell lot of standards. I would say it's the most transparent form of foreign direct investment. Go into any other foreign direct investment in the green sector, agricultural, whatever, palm oil, not just the bad ones, just the bean production in Kenya. You have no idea what these companies actually do. They get really deals, there's a lot of bribery going on. Anyways, we can't afford this. We've got to be hugely transparent. So just a heads up to that.
Thank you, Dulma. I'm gonna open up to audience questions if anyone's gonna have any. But Dulma, I wanted to invite you. Exactly.
Okay, I'll give a response from a business that's looking at it practically. We're all about transparency and accountability, and it hasn't been that easy to find all the ins and outs, because there's so much goes into this pair of shoes, from eyelets to laces to even how to dye this little red color and stuff. So it's a huge amount of work, but it's really worth it, because in the end of the day, our philosophy in the business is we're trying to build a regenerative business. What does it mean? First of all, from the basic offering. I do believe that if a company is not creating a product or service that's basically making people healthy, happy, supporting them to live a long, joyful life, then this product or service shouldn't exist in the first place. Okay, so this kind of the first kind of filter that ideally should have been great to have in the modern world. The second one is all about as soon as you have that, then automatically anything that you touch across your value chain, from dyes to how the products are shipped, then it all starts answering the questions. And obviously now we have to still work in the existing system. Like, we try and never ship products by air. It always needs to be go by sea. But then you go around all the shipping companies, like, what the hell is going on there? Yeah, so dirty and horrible. It's like, wow, like this is a whole another industry of basically shit everywhere. So like, what do you do with it? But then what do? You like pick up the boxes and literally walk across the planet? So like, that's why the local manufacturing is obviously very important. But then in terms of reporting, I mentioned we're a B Corp, but we started also creating a reporting format that beyond B Corp, like we go into like sort of third, fourth level of basically supply chain providers, and how all our communication campaign affect the communities. We do a lot of like policy work and things like that, stuffs that are not covered yet by B Corp. And this is another issue with all the reporting stuff. Yeah, like we put so much efforts to show like how we're running the business, but then it's like it's all not comparable. Like it would be amazing to have a sort of next level of regenerative lens to how we can build product or services moving forward, or looking it through like a living systems lens, how we can help life to thrive. Yeah, like and it does it, and it's could cover anything from business to how charities are organized to anything around us. So it's like that's where we at right now. So
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I've got another question, but I just wanted to open it up to the audience if anyone wanted to ask a question. Can we get a microphone? Can we get a microphone over here, please, to the guy in the blue? Thank you.
Really interesting discussion around sort of the balance between sort of the idea of carbon credits, blue credits, biodiversity credits, and all this sort of stuff, which is really an obsession with measuring and proving due diligence through audit, really. So if you were to look 10 years into the future, what do you see as being sort of the evolution of this, or the ideal evolution in terms of, do we need to get less obsessed with measuring and proving the outcomes of things? Or do we need to get better at measuring and doing it more cost effectively so that you can sort of scale and expand that measurement so that it's sort of proven? I'd be interested in sort of everyone's views on that.
Such a good question.
Super question, yeah. And actually one that's really right now quite at the forefront of my mind. Let me start answering by sort of going back to the forest floor. Monitoring, what it actually is, is being a ranger, being out there, walking around, walking past your territory and taking data points, right? That action alone is often enough that to protect a territory, to stop invaders coming in for communities. If we speak a bit from that level, farmers out in the field, we see the soil, we do it, we do monitor our fields anyways. We're already out there. So I think there's huge developments right now in making that more accessible and costly as well. Not costly, so the other way, cheaper or less costly, by bringing in new data technologies and things like that. Exciting developments, but we can't really not do it. It wouldn't make sense, because firstly it creates jobs, also creates connection, and really it's something that ultimately is part of just seeing what's going on, and being able to respond to your environment. At a larger scale, I think the trouble really sits with the country governments often, because they still don't have, and I'm just blows my mind. For 30 years I've been in this space, and still we're talking about we don't have the data, at a national scale about what our deforestation rates are. It's like, what, really? But yeah, underfunded sector. So I think there we also need, as a global community, need to allow ourselves a bit more graciousness and just work with lump sum figures. And at the end of the day, it's a mathematical problem that we should be able to solve with mathematical solutions. The uncertainty levels that we allow ourselves, and just be a bit more journalistic. I think I would totally like that. We're also moving towards indigenous-led monitoring, actually, so when it comes to the social side, to bring down costs. From auditors flying to projects, it's often international auditors, so there's a huge job to be done to build the industry in the countries and actually also in the communities, because you need the folks from the neighbors. Basically, they can judge whether they're doing that right or wrong. I couldn't, a Westerner just couldn't come in. So that's a couple of things going on there.
Would anyone like to answer it from a different perspective?
I can try. So if I'm imagining a perfect future, suddenly, something massive conscious uplift happened to all of us, and then
it's happening.
Yeah, but yeah, in the perfect case scenario, where we wouldn't need any of the measurement and data collection and all of that, because hopefully in future, we're so all amazing that there will be no, basically, essentially, crap created or made on the planet. So it should be, ideally, it could have been organized, self-organized, like living systems, like we used to live in indigenous communities. So that would be an ideal case scenario, which may be possible, you never know. But in the short run, it's impossible not to go anywhere without collection of this data and obviously measuring, because from our point of view, we want to see how it's all moving forward and how we can make it better. And also, if there is something ditches down, then we can notice it straight away and then make some obviously quick changes. But yeah, it's. But I think that in the short run, the most really important thing is what we're gonna measure, how we can all agree as a community what to measure. And the carbon tunnel vision is very dangerous. But yeah, I hopefully we can all come up with better measurement of so it's apple to apples, oranges to oranges, and we're all clear, and it's very simply communicated to the rest of the world, so everybody gets it and can actually put the businesses or whoever is involved accountable, and nobody shouldn't be doing any reporting for the sake of reporting. That's just waste of time.
Thank you. Is there another question? Can we get the microphone over here? I just quickly to your question, just in my mind, I feel like the problem with monitoring and reporting isn't monitoring and reporting. You want to know that the action that you're doing is having a beneficial effect. It's more like if you're doing it so that then you can sell that off, the benefit of that, to someone who's doing something to depreciate and degrade an environment, that's when it becomes something else. I feel like it's also around the intentionality and where those data points, what kind of system is that being fed into and how is that being traded?
Thank you, everyone. It's an incredible talk. Feeling really inspired. For those of us with corporate jobs, in your opinion, what can we do to influence key stakeholders to move the dial forward, especially in a climate when there is lots of regulation coming in and corporates are perhaps just worried about reporting for reporting's sake and rushing out to get carbon credits, etc., but don't really understand the true essence of what we need to tackle?
Leah or Jade or Danny?
We work with quite a lot of corporates, and I think it's really encouraging to see that there are employees that are advocating for change. And I think, as a minimum, there are so many different sustainability consultants now that are out there that are helping businesses meet their, it's not the area I know loads about, but is it kind of, what is it called, scope A, scope B, reducing all the different carbon emissions, but also in all the other, whatever the operations of the company are, all the other elements that you're starting as employees to feel that it's a more enjoyable place to work because of the changes that are being made. So I think it's about making sure you have a voice, making sure decisions are being brought up at kind of management and board level. And obviously I would say this as a charity, but also where emissions cannot be reduced, we think that the viable alternative to kind of the official calculated offsetting is supporting local projects around you. So understanding where your supply chain is, or where your office is, or where your employees enjoy being, and connecting with the kind of local groups on the ground who are restoring nature, and ask the company to have a philanthropic allocation or raise funds as a group, and it can be fun as well as rewarding.
Thank you. quick, because we got more questions.
My favorite thing is just send your senior leadership team for like some sort of mycelium psychedelic retreat. They will come back completely different.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Right into the board and just grab them out and bring them in. It's about personal development, I think. You know, like the few decision makers, really, these are the sort of hearts we got to shift. Yeah. Yeah.
Seconding the sentiment, amazing, inspiring, hearing what you guys are all saying. My question is about technology. We've heard about a lot of sort of seemingly intractable problems about measurement and coordination along like massive scales. Technology's arguably been kind of a catalyst for some of the destruction we're seeing. Is there a role for it in the restoration process, and particularly like maybe some transformative technology that might be coming around the corner and at scale?
I don't really have an answer to that, but I can imagine that planting seagrass at scale in the future could be mechanized, and I believe that in Chesapeake Bay there's a mechanized process for doing it there now, which is not necessarily transferable to the UK because it's a different type of seagrass. But I think probably is, but I think most of the solutions to our current problems to the oceans do not involve technology. In fact, let's keep technology out of it. When you listen to fishermen who talk about being the last of the hunter-gatherers, imagine a Paleolithic man dragging a John Deere tractor along the seabed 3,000, 4,000 years ago. It's absolute nonsense. Technology is the problem with the oceans. And the solution for much of the oceans is to do things like marine protected areas, highly protected marine protected areas, and to stop destructive fishing in inshore grounds. So, for example, in Scotland, in 1984, there was a limit lifted which prevented any bottom trawling and scallop dredging within 3 miles of the shoreline. That was lifted in 1984. The result of that is that all the fish nurseries and the spawning grounds have disappeared. Whitefish stocks have commercially collapsed. There is no quota anymore for cod, haddock and whiting. And this is something that we can reverse. And it's vested interest that prevents us from doing it. Politicians have, are in cahoots perhaps with the industry as well, but all we need to do is reinstate that limit and then bring back those fish nurseries and spawning grounds, and we'll see an uptick of biodiversity in the future. So that's the sort of pressure that we need. It's not more technology, we just need common sense.
Thank you.
Can I offer something on that? So I agree that a lot of the work that needs to happen in oceans is very practical and actually bringing back a lot of traditional knowledge in how we're utilizing the ocean specifically. That being said, I think there's a huge opportunity on the transparency side of things. We spoke about measuring. So, for example, if you look at the seafood industry and you take something like illegal fishing, actually being able to apply technology to look at the rates of illegal fishing around the world is hugely important. When you're looking at marine protected areas, a lot of that actually happens from a manpower perspective. How can that actually happen through technology in areas that it doesn't make sense to have people patrolling all the time? So I actually see technology being able to be our friend here if we choose to work with it the right way. And knowing what the limitations are, but also kind of co-designing essentially, these solutions too.
Yeah, totally. Can I give a land perspective?
Yeah, quick one.
A really quick one. Just totally agree. No big machinery on the land. Like coming back and restoration actually means breaking up big fields, and going really with light steps onto a very fragile soil and allowing soil life to come back and to plant. Really with as lowest impact as you can. So totally agree. No big machinery, but yes. Weather forecasts, really difficult to gauge right now. Irrigation, renewable energy, decentralized renewable energy, absolutely critical for certain parts, just to establish like the first, if you want to reforest an area or something, you have some droughts here in the South Downs in the summer, it's terrible, they're just going to all die, So there's lots of that kind of just bringing, I guess, technologies together in a smart way. Huge opportunities.
Thank you all so much. We're drawing to a close now, and as we do so, I just want to touch on, because the incredible, like one of the incredible things about ecosystem restoration is that it can go from like the very, very small scale of kind of restoring, not even restoring, but bringing biodiversity into your local space, to your balcony or your back garden. Like 83% of people in the 83% of households in the UK have got access to a garden. Imagine if all of those people in the UK were learning how to grow biodiverse gardens that attracted a biodiversity of pollinators. Just, you know, like we're talking a lot because a lot of people on the panel, you know, they're working at quite a high level, and so conversation goes there, and it must. But I also just want to bring it also down to like the very practical actions that we can all do as a collective. In the same way, on the Earth platform that we built, you can learn about river restoration, you can learn about soil regeneration, community-supported agriculture, building farmers markets. Like, these are things that everyone can participate in, and it's really about the marrying of these top-down solutions with bottom-up action and starting to remove the obstacles. And I guess my last question is about, you know, for each of you in the work that you're doing, you know, whether it's around bringing finance and resources to the places that need it most, or about policy change, or about incentivizing and bringing together local communities over restoration projects, you know, what are the obstacles that each of you find in your work, and how are you, or how can we help you to overcome them? So, Danny, perhaps starting with you again, please.
Well, there's a huge gulf between the political ambitions of returning biodiversity. There's lots of targets, return biodiversity by 50% by 2040 and things like that, and the actual action on the ground. And bridging that gulf is really important. And we think that projects like ours are helping to do that. We're becoming the delivery agents for that, and we're showing that it's possible and we can scale it up. But we need more support to do that from government. And so we get supported by the likes of the Conservation Collective and by philanthropic funds and by CSR funds and things like that. But if we're going to really take it seriously, then you've got to invest in this. And currently it's all talk and there's not enough investment. The other thing I would say is that there are various political campaigns around which and a lot of them petitions, you know, how successful are petitions, but they do exist and it's worth supporting them. And one of them at the moment is Patagonia has a petition to end bottom trawling, and in inshore waters and in marine protected areas. Most people think marine protected areas are protected. They're not. For example, in Scotland, 37% of the waters are marine protected areas. Only 4% of that 37% are prohibited for destructive practices like scallop dredging, bottom trawling. So they're absolutely meaningless. So don't be conned by this idea of marine protected areas. Make sure that they are actually protected. And so that sort of political pressure is very, very important. Sign the petitions because they ultimately, we hope they'll make a difference.
Thank you so much. And to you, Jade.
Trying not to end on a negative when it's what are the obstacles. People, how we overcome them. I mean, a major problem we have is that we work with so many different people, and people don't get on, and people don't like each other, and people have egos, and amazing projects fall apart because of arrogance and oversensitivity and ownership. But I started this, and they didn't tag me on Instagram. It's unbelievable, some of the things that go wrong for really crazy things. So I think, I'm not sure what we as this current group can do, but I think kind of having those conversations, getting people on the same page, talking to your friends about this, I think, as you said earlier, kind of getting really things that we all feel passionate about more into the mainstream, having those uncomfortable conversations. You know, if you're the person at a dinner party who says, I don't eat cod because of environmental issues, and, you know, I have friends who go out for dinner with me and like, don't judge, I want the scallops, you know. But you've got to have those conversations and then say, well, you should just read this book. I'm not saying don't have them, but just read this book and just get people to be a bit more aware of what's going on around us, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think when it comes to oceans, it's really making everyone realize that they have a place and really have a responsibility to be a part of this dialogue, actually. Less than 1% of all philanthropic spending actually goes towards ocean conservation, so there is a huge need. And someone asked the questions of how corporates can get involved. That's through the employees, through the people. So starting to look at how as individuals, what are the decisions that I'm making every single day, and how can I actively become part of those conversations? And I just want to give a shout out actually to Earthed, so to Christabel and Ruby's platform, which provide so many different solutions, how every single person here today can support and get involved in their local communities. So I think I'm personally so grateful that you brought something to fruition that's so tangible. So I think that's the easiest takeaway too.
Amazing. I need to check out this platform. I feel really embarrassed now. I don't know.
It's very new.
Phew. Great. One thing I think, one of the most powerful things that we can do as consumers is with our choice and how we spend our money. Where do we leave our love in terms of our financial love, right? I would, my suggestion always is trust your local dealer, build your local economy. Buy locally as much as you can, buy organic as much as you can, if you can afford it, of course, or be part of a growing project. And I used to sort of think, when I started No Planet B initiative, I thought, how can we save the planet? If we only would eat all the right things that are good for us and our bellies, then we would stop eating palm oil, we would stop eating all these refined flours and sugars. Now, actually, sort of 15, 20 years later, living on an island that is riding into a recession with open eyes, and where supermarket chains have a power that I've never experienced elsewhere on the planet before, I think actually from a purely health perspective, from a resilience perspective for yourself and for your family, for your loved ones, eating locally and growing is the safest thing you can do, Because what you get in the supermarkets is not good. I mean, a lot of that stuff's not good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just build up on this. From my side, like if we can individually just filter everything we see around us, from politics to media to big pharma, big ag, everything you touch upon is like so big and overwhelming and basically dark. Let's put it that way. So it's like if we can get together and actually support each other, like independent businesses, amazing like up and coming organizations like Christabel's, then we can make a difference. Like there is an incredible speaker called Zach Bush who said, if we can galvanize 4% of the global population who are basically conscious mavericks, so people who like understanding and trying to build a better connected communities, then we can start making more like a halo effect on the rest of the world. So only 4% of the population needs to get together, like to create this type of change. I find this number like quite amazing. So let's do it.
Thank you everyone so much. I really hope that this conversation has, if you weren't already, ignited like a small passion or curiosity or love for the power and potential of ecosystem restoration, because it really can bring us all together. We can be united through positive nature-based solutions rather than ripping apart narratives around whose fault it is and what the problem is. Of course, all of that is so absolutely essential. But if our whole focus is on what needs to be changed rather than the vision of a world where humans and nature thrive together as they do across the world in many other different communities, we're never actually going to be able to be getting to that place. And instead, we're just burning ourselves out, focusing on the problem rather than galvanizing and gathering ourselves and uniting around a positive vision that everyone can share. So I do really encourage you to check Earth out. It's earth.co. Your monthly donations go to supporting the teachers on the platform, the charity and platform itself. And then as we grow, the donations will go into an action fund, because as it's been spoken about today, access to trust-based participatory grants are absolutely essential for the scaling of restoration. And so our aim is to get to 200,000 members for £4 a month. Will you choose your donation? That would be 9.6 million a year. So just you can imagine, just everyone joining, kind of leveraging the e-learning market in order to start to siphon money through the donations to really start to enable these restoration projects that can happen all over the world. And I really hope that you walk away with this positive feeling about all the solutions that exist. So thank you very much. Thank you.